That's never happened before. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to see all of you out here this afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to our afternoon of Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project. We are a group of grassroots Albertans with no politicians at our table, committed to inspiring, advocating, and educating all Albertans on how we can achieve freedom and prosperity through independence. We're just regular, everyday people, just like all of you. This project started with a group of hardworking Albertans who were tired of top-down, corrupt, tyrannical governments meddling in their affairs. Y'all know how that feels, right? So that group of Albertans decided then and there that they were going to do something about it. And from those humble, often heated beginnings, the Alberta Prosperity Project was born. And here we are. I would like to invite Alain Gauthier to start our event off with a prayer. I didn't tell him that part.
No problem. It's just that I was working on the camera. A couple of weeks ago, we got a little bit of a challenge on our prayer. So I don't pray with a disclaimer, but I want to clarify that I'm not praying on your behalf. I'm praying for you. So if prayer offends you, I really apologize, truly. You can come back late 10 minutes, you'll miss that part. But so I'm going to pray for us as a group here. So, Father, we thank you for this beautiful province that we have. And we thank you for opportunities that we have like today to meet together, to talk about our future, the future of our children, the future of our grandchildren. You've blessed this country, this province so much, and we are thankful for that. And we're thankful for safe travel. We're thankful for the many blessings you've given us. Give us a clear mind and an open heart and an open mind to what's being said today. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Elaine. So my name is Shannon Packham, and I'm a teacher. But I've not been inside a classroom since the end of February 2020. And it was at that time that I discovered that if you're not going to stand up for what is right, then you have to believe that you are part of what is wrong. And that's why I'm here. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." And we are certainly experiencing such times today. And the Alberta Prosperity Project has great suggestions on how all Albertans can face these challenges more successfully and prosperously. And I hope that your presence here encourages you and helps you to see our potential. And I also hope that it encourages you to go out and spread this message. I know it's hard to grasp right at this moment, but I do believe that there is a better future for all of us. It's just around the corner, and it starts right here today. After these presentations, hopefully you'll be able to understand what is waiting for all of us and what we all can have. We're planting the seeds of hope here today, and we're planting the seeds of change. So this is how our events work. We have guest speakers. They come up here and they tell you lots of things, and I recommend you take notes, because we also have a time where you can ask questions. We'll have our presenters answer those questions. And we ask that you write your question on an index card. The ladies have them over at that table over there. So you write the questions, just makes it go faster rather than me running out and about with the microphone. We just ask them, they answer them, and then we move on. When you came in, you were given a rack card. That's our information card, the little long card. You pass the membership table. There's memberships over there starting at $20, and also the petition. So we count on the memberships and donations to keep the wheels turning on this bus. So anything that you're able to give, we appreciate that. We also have merchandise at the back table. And Hats, t-shirts. The hats are $40. The t-shirts are $20, and there's also some golf shirts back there. The bathrooms are out that door and to the right. This way. And also, if you could go, we are live streaming this event today, so if you could go to your, if you have Facebook on your cell phone, you could go to our Facebook page, Alberta Prosperity Project. It is blue background with gold letters. Find the live stream, like it, and share it with a few of your friends. I also would like to give a shout out to our volunteers. Without volunteers, these events don't go off very well. And also a special shout out to Van Hout Bakery. They provided the donuts, and I've had 2 of them already, and they're pretty good. And also Neighbors Pub, because they stayed open today. Normally they're closed, so that there's food available for us here today. So that's how our events go. And then I give you homework, and then y'all go home. And we move on to the next one. All right, so our first guest is a resident of Edmonton, educated over 17 years at the universities of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. He is recently retired 30-year heart and lung surgeon and critical care specialist. He is known as the North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplantation program in Western Canada, performing the first heart transplant in 1985 and the first heart and both lungs in 1986. The success of his programs grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. He has been recognized with numerous awards in excellence for medicine as well as in community service. He is an exceptional community leader and brilliant mind, and he has always advocated for the overall health and well-being of the people. He is a key driver of this project as one of the founding members and also as our CEO. And on top of all of that, he has had great political influence in the eras of Premiers Getty, Klein, and Stelmach. He is here to talk to us today about Alberta's prosperity and freedom through independence. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry.
Thank you, Shannon, and welcome, folks. It's just always wonderful to see so many people come to an event when they have nothing better to do. And so thank you for being here. It's also wonderful for me to see at so many of these events former patients that I've operated on, and to see that they're still alive, because that, after all, was the objective, right? And through my career, I had an opportunity to operate on some 7,000 plus patients, and it was extremely meaningful for me. But as a cardiac surgeon, as a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon, I could only help one person at a time. And through the Alberta Prosperity Project, now along with a great team of people and fabulous people on our board, and you're going to meet Jeff Rath, our general counsel, constitutional lawyer, litigator. He's going to be speaking to you as well. We have just some fabulous people working with us to help share this message. I'm going to start off a little bit different today. I have to tell you that we had an event in Slave Lake yesterday, and most of you use a GPS these days, try and figure out where you want to go. Maps are kind of out of the norm right now. So I'm driving along with my wife on Highway 16 West, and eventually I get a call from a friend of mine, and I'm wondering why my GPS hasn't been talking to me. And so eventually I realized that I hadn't pressed start. So we wound up so far along Highway 16 West that when my GPS kicked in and we had to get back on the right path to get to Slave Lake, it took us through the worst roads I have ever seen. And I wasn't sure, because it's a very low riding car, but fortunately it has a feature which you can raise it a bit. But the ruts and the gravel and the slow travel, I tell you, that was an experience. But to get to an event, I wouldn't miss it for the world, absolutely. And that's what we're really all about. And, you know, through this project, like I said, as a cardiac surgeon, I could help one person at a time, but our team is really trying to help an entire province and each one of the individuals in that province. And maybe indirectly will help the rest of Canada as well. So I'm going to start off by saying, how many people here are pleased with the performance of our federal government? Just raise your hand. That's the classic response. What about the performance of our Prime Minister? That's pretty much the classic response that we get. And you know, an Angus Reid survey reported on January the 4th also reported that 73% of Albertans are disillusioned with the provincial government. It makes me wonder, I mean, with the federal government, and it makes me wonder, well, what happened to the other 23%? Maybe they were just too busy, or they're disillusioned themselves. Anyhow, what about the performance of our provincial government? Is anybody here pleased with the performance? No. What about the performance of Mr. Kenney? Well, what does it really tell you about government? It tells you really that it's pretty simple. You're not happy with government. The question is, why? Is it corruption? Is it that governments make promises that they then don't keep? Is it high taxes, fiscal mismanagement, frankly lying? All of those things. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, I'm not upset that you lied to me, I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you. And isn't that the case with government these days? Well, how many people here are concerned about their individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity? Yeah, most of you? Okay, there are some people that didn't raise their hand, so is everybody that didn't raise their hand pleased with the potential future of their individual freedoms and rights and prosperity? Okay, so you were just too lazy to raise your hand then. Okay. Okay, we're gonna have an exercise program partway through this then. All right, well, it's interesting to note that there was another survey done by Angus Reid, reported on January the 12th, and it asked the question with respect to prosperity, but it was worded differently. But 87% of Albertans polled reported that they were concerned about inflation and the cost of living, right? Now, speaking of inflation and the cost of living, I'll tell you a story. Some of you may have heard this, but Lana, my wife, and I were going to Medicine Hat a few weeks ago. Huge audience, about 1,400 people, but I was low on petrol, and so we stopped at the Shell just as you come into the city. And if you go to if you've ever been to Medicine Hat, you're coming in from the north, and you pull into that Shell, you'll see that the gas pumps don't have a card reader, so you have to go inside and say how much gas you want. So I go inside, and behind this massive plexiglass barrier is an individual sitting down, and I look over at him and I say, could I get $10,000 worth of gas on pump number 2? And he looks at me in deadpans and he says, well, would that be regular or V-Power? You know, so it was just fun to play with that a little bit, given the fact that it really isn't fun to think about this cost of living and the things that are being done that really are harming all of us, and disproportionately us in Alberta. Jack Mintz, who's the chair of public policy at the University of Calgary, reported on Remembrance Day, November the 11th, that ending Alberta's oil and gas industry will result in a 1/3 reduction in the average income of all Albertans. Folks, we truly are facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our individual freedoms and rights, and to each one of us in terms of our economic well-being, if we do nothing. But I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that if we do something amazing, something that's never been done before, and we come together for common cause, the future can be absolutely brilliant. But we have to come together to do that. Now, what is that? Well, in essence, it is the purpose of the Alberta Prosperity Project. And there's a lot more to it than just what I'm going to say right now. But fundamentally, it's to unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their interests, their individual freedoms and rights, and their prosperity by enabling Alberta to chart a new path forward. And what is that new path forward? Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but let me just talk to you a little bit about the dilemma that we currently are in if we do nothing in particular. And we'll look at the dilemma that we're in from the perspective of freedoms, and we'll look at it from the perspective of prosperity. And by the way, there's a bit of prosperity right there, and there's been a reflection of freedom right there, as you will all recall from the Freedom Convoy that went to Ottawa. Now, with respect to freedom, how many people here would like freedom from being overgoverned, overregulated, and overtaxed? Right. And you're not happy with, you're okay with being overgoverned, overregulated. He's just one of those lazy ones that can't raise his hand. What about the freedom of religion and freedom of association and freedom of assembly? We've lost much of that, and we've seen how easy it is to lose it altogether. And what about the issue of the freedom to own and enjoy property? That's an interesting one, because you're probably thinking to yourself, what does he mean by that? How many people own their homes with no mortgage? Just don't pay your taxes and you'll find out who really owns your home. That's my point. We don't really have property rights. But I can tell you this, if we do this right, eventually we could eliminate property tax in this province, probably the only place in Canada that could ultimately do it. Now, one of the more maddening things is, what about the freedom of families to be the moral, cultural, and spiritual pillar of society, to pass on to future generations values, principles, beliefs, ethical behavior, responsibility, accountability, critical thinking? Where has that gone? To the school systems. It's been taken away from the parents. And you've seen much of that. Now, I heard something today that I think is going to be maddening. How many people, of the ladies, how many people here are mothers? Please raise your hand. Okay. Well, there's an elementary school in British Columbia that yesterday voted to eliminate Mother's Day. I'm not kidding you. And they want to call it the Grown-Ups Who Love You Day. Can you imagine what they're going to call Father's Day? It might be just Sperm Day. Who knows? But this is the kind of thing that's occurring in society. Now, how many people would like freedom from wokeness, cancel culture, critical race theory? Raise your hand. Right. I thought the Mother's Day one would stimulate, and even you raised your hand with that one. That was good. That was good. That was good. Next time I want to see both hands go up. All right. Now, but if we consider the freedoms that we've lost, we have lost, very many of our freedoms. Freedom of speech. I'm speaking to you today, but look at how many people have tried to speak out against a conventional narrative, and they've been canceled or they've lost their jobs. So we really don't even have free speech anymore. You can't have a civil conversation with somebody these days if you have a different perspective than they do, because they may refer to you as racist, right? Because you just simply have a different view, a different perspective on something. So these are the kinds of things that are really difficult. But how many people here have thought or read a little bit about the Great Reset? Okay. Now, there's a lot of people that will say that the Great Reset, well, that's never going to happen. Well, in fact, the truth of the matter is, for those people who think that it's never going to happen, It's already published on the World Economic Forum of the United Nations website. But for those who want a crystal clear summary of what it is, it's really a highly influential movement by the global elites of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations under a contract that they call Agenda 2030 to reset the global economy and the actual structure of how society will operate using the banking system, governance, and environmental governance and social metrics to control billions of people. So for those people who say the Great Reset isn't going to occur, why is it that the federal government and even the Alberta government is starting with job one of the Great Reset, and that is the digital ID, which will be followed by a digital currency, which will be followed by a social credit score, which will be based on your perspective of environmental, social, and governance metrics. And this is what is going to happen. So in other words, you'll be pinned, cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled in everything that you do, where you go, and what you can buy and how much of it. And given the world economic efforts to get rid of the beef industry, as an example, or to diminish it, not just the beef industry, the livestock industry in general, because Bill Gates wants to get rid of all meat, right? Why is he buying up farms all over North America? And so you're going to go to the grocery store one of these days, if this actually gets fully implemented, and you're going to give them your credit card, and your credit card, they may say to you, oh no, you bought steaks 2 months ago. You have to wait another 2 months before you can buy steaks again. Now that may be an exaggeration, but this is the kind of thing that is potentially out there. As Klaus Schwab has said, you will own nothing and be happy. Please raise your hand if there's anybody here that will be happy if they own nothing. Right. So if that's the way you feel, then think to yourself, you want to resist this. Now, let's just sort of look at that's a little discussion about freedoms that have been lost, and that what might happen down the line if the Great Reset takes place. Now, in terms of prosperity, think of it from two perspectives, from our energy industry and from confiscatory taxation. So from our energy industry perspective, you all know that we've been blessed. Alberta's been blessed. It has the third largest oil resource, and 97.3% of the known oil reserves are right here in this province. Now, by 2030, the federal government has announced that there will be a 42% reduction in our oil output. But they're going to continue importing oil from countries that don't have the same environmental and social standards that we do. How does that even make sense? So other countries get wealthy, we become poor, particularly Alberta. That's the plan. And we're vilified for our oil industry, aren't we? By the eco-alarmists and the radical environmentalists because of CO2 production. And yet, at the same time, when CO2 goes up, plant life thrives because it's plant food. You all know that. So they don't take into account something else, and that's our carbon sink. We have a massive carbon sink with over 320 billion trees, muskeg, agricultural plants, etc., that soak up that CO2. It's been estimated by other environmental studies that we already are carbon negative. And aside from that, we only produce 0.15% of the entire world's global CO2 emissions. So why are we targeted? We are the #1 hit by the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and the climate alarmists, as it were. How many people here know how many products emanate from a barrel of oil? Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. It's the same line that somebody answered from Blackie when I asked that question. He said, all of them. And that's true, all of them. Well, it's over 6,000 products. And there's almost nothing that the hydrocarbon industry does not touch. Roads we drive on, contact lenses, clothes we wear, that which wraps this cable, contact lenses, components of cell phones and computers. I mean, it just goes on and on. Medications, all kinds, including aspirin, Tylenol, and anesthetic agents, etc. It's a massive list. More than that, you know, if you try and talk to somebody who really has a form of cognitive dissonance, and they're not going to listen to anybody who's going to support the hydrocarbon industry. If you're talking to somebody who wants to eliminate the hydrocarbon industry, ask them, if you can, because they're your kid or your friend or your sister or brother, to give you their cell phone and to give you their laptop or their iPad. So you can't have it back because you don't want the hydrocarbon industry, and you can't have this without the hydrocarbon industry. Just as a way of getting their attention. See how far that goes. The other thing to think about is that a lot of these people, you know, when you're trying to engage them in these kinds of conversations, it's not easy, is it? And you know that. Many of you have had these kinds of discussions and you get shut down and that sort of thing, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue trying. And so one of the things, you can pose the question, well, how many acres of land is used up to make one gas plant or one coal plant? They won't know the answer, and you can say the answer is about 4 acres. Then ask them the question, how much land does it take to put wind turbines on that will generate the same amount of energy as a coal plant or a gas plant that sits on 4 acres of property? They won't know the answer to that question either. But the answer is 2,500 acres. And funnily enough, nobody asked the birds how they felt about it. But at the same time, where does the energy come from to create these wind turbines and solar panels? And as you know, the blades directly come from plastic generation. And none of the components of solar panels or wind turbines are biodegradable. So they just have to bury them. These are things that, you know, many of the environmental, or the people who are really concerned about the environment, don't know and don't think about because they're never exposed to it. I don't know how many of you know, for example, that not one, I just learned this the other day. In 1864, there was an individual, I don't know his name, but I have to do a little research on that, but I just heard this the other day. 1864 was the first mention of any concern about the environment in relation to what man does. But here's the thing. There have been over 100 apocalyptic predictions due to climate change. How many of them do you think have occurred? None, not one. So it makes you ask the question, when will we ever learn? You know that song, When Will We Ever Learn? I can't sing with beans, but in any case, there's that song. Point is that, I don't know, after you've been told something 100 times and it doesn't occur, why do people continue to think that it's going to still occur when it doesn't? Particularly when we get these tight timelines. So Alexandria, whatever her name is, Octavio Cortez or something like that, has said the world's going to end in 12 years. Well, that was a couple of years ago, so we got 10 to go. Does anybody here believe that? No, I don't think so. And the last thing I want to say about the issue of our energy industry being vilified is think about how this has happened. Anybody know or have heard of the Allen Report? Steve Allen is a forensic accountant, and he was commissioned by the provincial government, our provincial government, to look at foreign government spending that has been used to interfere with the development and transport of our natural resources. Between 2003 and 2019, $1.3 billion has been spent to shutter our energy industry. Where do you think that money came from? Where did it get from? Where did it derive to go to Trudeau? From all of us. That's one source. That's one source. Our own federal government, using our tax dollars to shutter Alberta. This is how the federal government targets Alberta. This is what they think about Alberta. But that's not the only source. The other sources come from other countries and other energy industries in other countries. And why is that? Because it's a competitive world. So if we can shut down the third largest oil resource, then we're going to make more profit in other areas. And this is part of what you need to understand was the whole purpose of the climate argument started by Maurice Strong to use climate change as a means of shifting wealth from first world countries to third world countries, to build up third world countries. This was a massive wealth transfer scheme, and it's working. It's working, just like Maurice Strong, and then he got George Soros to get involved with this. This is all public knowledge. It takes a little research to find it out, but just look at Maurice Strong. You know what's embarrassing? Do you know where Maurice Strong came from? Do you know where he got his money? He came from Manitoba, and he was a billionaire oil man. So I guess he had so much money, he felt that he needed to shift money from other people's pockets to, I like to say, from those who do to those who don't. That may be harsh, but that's the way I feel about it. Let's look at confiscatory taxation. How many people here know how much federal taxes leaves this province and goes to Ottawa? Yeah, too much. It's in the order of $55 to $60 billion a year. We get back in transfers about half. We overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year. For those of you who are pensioners here right now, would you like to see that $3 billion stay in Alberta and massively increase your pensions? I think so. And since 1965, when equalization started in 1957, but it ended for Alberta in 1965. Between 1965 and today, nearly $700 billion has gone to Ottawa, for which we have received not one penny back. That money's been used for causes and virtue signaling that we have had zero control over. So the question is, really, ladies and gentlemen, and then of course there's the carbon tax, right? So all we know right now with the massive debt that we're facing, what's going to happen with income tax? It's going to go up. What's going to happen with the cost of living? It's going to go up. Inflation, it's going to go up. I'm fearful that I think there's going to be massive home losses and mortgage failures and businesses that are shuttered. It's not going to be that much different than the aftermath of the National Energy Policy from 1980, where Alberta was really hammered. So the question is, folks, what are we going to do about all of this? Mention was made of Martin Luther King. He once said that unjust laws are out of harmony with moral law. And whereas we have a legal and a moral responsibility to obey just laws, we have an equal responsibility, moral responsibility, to disobey unjust laws. And I would say we have an equal responsibility to disobey and rid ourselves of unjust governance as well. So what are we to do? We have three options. One is the do nothing option, and the other is two options to chart a new path forward. So the do nothing option looks like this. I want you to consider that Alberta is like a canoe on the Niagara River, and you're the inhabitants of that canoe, and you know which way that canoe is floating, right? And eventually you're going to hear the rush of the falls, and you got a chance. You got one chance, and that's to paddle like crazy to get to the shore and save everybody. And if you wait too long, you're going over the falls into the abyss of the hell of the Great Reset. That's coming. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's conspiracy fact. And, for those who doubt it, it's even being talked about on the national media. And of course, you all believe everything that happens, that is said on the national media, right? Especially CNN and CBC, etc. But in this case, it's true. That is coming if we do nothing. So what are our options then? What are really our options? Well, it's for Alberta to chart a new path forward within Canada, wherein Alberta has control of its wealth and it has control of its affairs and programs, such as getting out from under the Canadian Health Act, which prevents creative solutions. I don't know if you know, our health care system, Alberta Health Services, functions in the lowest quartile of performance, and the costs are in the highest quartile. That system, and I've worked in it for over 30 years, in my opinion, is absolutely corrupt. Anyhow, but taking control of the development and transport of our natural resources, taking control of our education system, and many other things. So how many people here would prefer that Alberta stay in Canada, but have control over its wealth and its affairs? Just raise your hand. Okay, so that would be roughly maybe 50%, 40%. How many people would prefer that Alberta leave Confederation and start a new country? Okay, so that's a minority. All right, so let's look at the prospect, the possibility of fixing Alberta's circumstances within Confederation. And we're going to use a metaphor of the ending equalization. Think of ending equalization as a metaphor for ending any egregious program that harms Alberta's interests. How many people here voted in I think it was October of last year, to end equalization? Raise your hand. Okay, did anybody vote not to end equalization? Okay, so let's look at, for those people who would like Alberta to stay in Confederation, let's look at the prospect of ending equalization. And like I say, consider it as a metaphor for ending any other program. So what will it take? We're going to look at it through the lens of history, the structural electoral imbalance, and the constitutional hurdles. So first of all, a little bit of history. You all know that Alberta was incorporated into Canada September 1, 1905. Or if you didn't, you know now. But did you know that the fix was in 1904? In 1904, Sir Clifford Sifton, who was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, he was the one that was responsible for bringing Alberta into Confederation. But he said something very prescient, and it's really important to understand what he said in 1904, to understand why Alberta is where it is now. This is what he said. He said, "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire," and when he refers to Canadian patriots in 1904, he's referring to the people living in the regions of Quebec and Ontario. "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies," and the great trade of the prairies is Alberta's wealth, "that the great trade of the prairies shall go to," where? "Enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity." Not the prosperity of Alberta, but our prosperity. September 1, 1905, we were incorporated as a colony into Canada. 116 years later, we're still a colony, and we're still pillaged and plundered for the benefit of the East. Now, over that 116 years, here's something important to know. Not one federal government and not one provincial government has ever protected Alberta's interests. That is why we are attacked so vociferously by the federal government, because they want our wealth, but they don't want to have us control any of our affairs. And think about this. In 2001, Stephen Harper, Tom Flanagan, Ted Morton, and a couple of others drafted what was called at that time the Firewall Letter. Does anybody remember that? The Firewall Letter. What did it document that it wanted to happen? This is what they were asking for at that time. We want the provincial government to take control of policing, pensions, immigration, and employment insurance. They didn't say anything about taxation at that time. So, in 21 years, not one of those things has happened. Fast forward to where we are now, or in 2019, when Jason Kenney and the UCP were elected, they had a fair deal panel, right? What do you think has been implemented from the fair deal panel? Nothing. Not a single thing. So why would anybody think, from a historical perspective, that we can fix anything within Confederation? So if you still think that we can end equalization or save Alberta within Confederation, then let's move on to the next hurdle, which is the electoral imbalance. And what I refer to there is that we don't have representation by population in Canada, but it wouldn't matter anyhow, even if there was representation by population. But let's just look at where we are right now. So PEI, Prince Edward Island, elects one federal MP for every 40,000 population. Alberta gets to elect one federal MP for the House of Commons for every 130,000 population. And it's no better in the Senate. And what does this really mean? It means two things. It means, number one, every single federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario. And it does not matter the party that is in power, because in order to get power and in order to remain in power, that party will have to pander to the wishes of Quebec and Ontario at Alberta's expense. And that's why we continue to be suffocated in this confederation. Now, if you still think that we can end equalization, after hearing a little bit of history and after understanding the electoral imbalance, let's look at the constitutional hurdles in order to end equalization or any of these other egregious programs. So, there are 5 hurdles. The first one is you have to have a majority vote in the House of Commons to open the Constitution and change it to benefit Alberta. Similarly, that has to be ratified in the Senate. Third, you also have to have 7 of 10 provincial legislatures representing 50% of the population also voting in favor of ending equalization to benefit Alberta. And how do you think Quebec will vote? Because they get 2 of every $3 of equalization. And that brings up the 4th hurdle, and that is Quebec believes that it has a veto. And it may well have. And 5 days ago, they proved that they do. This is what they did. They passed legislation in Quebec called Bill 96. And what Bill 96 does is it basically vetoes a constitutional act that gives minority rights or gives language rights to minorities in Canada. But they abrogated those minority rights with Bill 26 or Bill 96 in Quebec. Even though they didn't sign on to the 1982 Constitution, they've demonstrated that they can control the Constitution and they can control the federal government. And they do. Now, let's look at the fifth hurdle, and that's the Supreme Court. So if there's a constitutional battle on ending equalization or ending any egregious program that harms Alberta's interests, and it becomes a constitutional battle, that's going to be resolved at the level of the Supreme Court. And there's two things to understand with respect to constitutional battles, particularly at this level, is that they don't take months or years to resolve. They often take decades to resolve. How much time do you think we have before we go over the falls? We don't have that much time. But even more relevant is the way the Supreme Court is constituted by judges appointed from the Prime Minister's office, of which there are 9. 3 justices are appointed from Quebec, 3 from Ontario, 1 from the Maritimes, and 2 from all of the West. Now, how do you think the Supreme Court will resolve a constitutional battle such as ending equalization or any of these other programs? In Alberta's interest? Unlikely. And if you want some evidence of that, just look at how the Supreme Court twisted itself into a darn pretzel to approve a carbon tax, which is absolutely, totally against provincial constitutional rights to develop and transport our natural resources. So, yeah, and we're not in a position. Quebec has the ability to veto, we do not. Now, 2 other points to make, or 1 other point to make, of which there's 2 components. There have been 2 attempts to change the Constitution in the past. One was the Charlottetown Accord, the other was the Meech Lake Accord. They both failed. So for those people who want Alberta to remain in Confederation, who truly want Alberta to remain in Confederation, you just simply need to understand the impossibility of saving ourselves if we do nothing. And what is it that we can do? Well, I'm going to get to that in just 1 second. Because the other component, the other possibility is for Alberta to become a new sovereign constitutional republic. But the truth of the matter is that we can't do that right now. And we also cannot fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation for all of the reasons I just gave you. But here's the opportunity we have. We can bring these 2 paradigms together, meaning that those of you who would like Alberta to stay in Confederation and those of you who would like Alberta to chart a new path forward, you need to come together this way. Because the only way you can achieve either of those 2 paradigms if Alberta has leverage, if it has negotiating power. And the only leverage, the only negotiating power that can work is an honest referendum on independence. Because that successful referendum on independence, which is perfectly legal, and there's a process, the Clarity Act makes it very clear that this is a legal process. Therefore, a successful referendum on independence gives Alberta the moral and legal legitimacy to chart a new path forward. And here's the way it would work. So let's say in the 2023 election, a government is elected that is agreeable to hold a referendum on independence. And so that government then, in 2023, passes as its first piece of legislation what I've termed, and Rob Anderson from the Free Alberta Strategy has termed, the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And what does that do? Well, 1, it accelerates Alberta's constitutional right to take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. That's all legal within the Constitution. But that sets up also the opportunity to take control of federal tax collection. In addition to that, the Alberta Sovereignty Act would create a new regulatory environment for ATB and the credit unions, meaning that CRA and the federal government would not be able to have access to those accounts. They could never freeze your account because you're no longer, those ATB and the credit unions wouldn't be controlled by federal regulations. That would protect depositors. Would you like that? I thought you would. So then you have between 24 and 30 months, you can have this referendum on independence. And that referendum on independence, I believe, will be successful. Then the government can go to Ottawa and negotiate a better deal for a period of 6 to 12 months, very much like Brexit. And at the end of 6 to 12 months of negotiating, Alberta already has that legal and moral right to secede, but it gives those folks who want Alberta to stay in Confederation an opportunity to understand and see in real time that the rest of the country and Ottawa doesn't want to deal fairly with Alberta. Then you will know. And then Alberta can chart a new path forward. But could we be surprised and find out that, well, gee, all of a sudden we get everything we want? Well, then we would just stay. But for those people who are concerned, you wear your on your heart Canadiana, if you will, and you don't want Alberta to leave Canada. But remember, Canada's already left Alberta. We're just looking at a way of formalizing it. Formalizing as either independence within Canada or independence untethered to Canada. It's important also to understand that we would intend to remain part of the Commonwealth, so that even though we're leaving Canada, we're still part of the Commonwealth. That gives us interesting trade opportunities, etc. And there's much more that can be said about that. Now, what is APP doing now to try and make this all happen? Well, we're having events like this one here, with smaller crowds, larger crowds, and massive crowds. But we're doing much more than that. What we want to do is we want to grow the membership of the Alberta Prosperity Project to 500,000, 1 million or more people. And why is that relevant? It's relevant for this reason. It has to do with what is called the 3.5% rule, coined by Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor. She studied societal movements over a couple hundred years, and what she determined was that 3.5% of a population can change the direction of that society. So when Jason Kenney was elected, he had 120,000 members. Do you know what percent that is of the electorate in Alberta? 3.5%. Isn't that interesting? Now, there were more people than that voted because one member usually influences 2 or 3 other people, right? So if we grow the membership to 500,000 or 1 million people or more, then we will control the outcome of the provincial election in 2023. Ralph Klein used to say, great friend, love that guy, he used to say, find a parade and get in front of it. Well, we're creating that parade. We're creating that movement. And we know the parties, UCP, TIP, the Alberta Advantage Party, etc., they want to get in front of the parade, the movement that we are creating. We know that already. So we must be doing something right. In addition to that, the way we're helping to drive this process is with an international marketing and advertising company. And we're rolling out educational material on every media platform, social media, and the younger people particularly like TikTok and Instagram, but on every social media platform, Western Standard as well as Rebel News, True North, and in addition to that, Touch Broadcasting Canada, billboards, etc. And we're setting up something very unique, educational chapters throughout the province. I thought at one time we would set up maybe 80 or 90, maximum 100 chapters. Well, Shannon will give you the exact number, but I think we're somewhere around 139, 140 chapters already, and we just started on February the 18th. So think about that. Now, each one of these chapters, you can imagine, if we set up, and it's predicted we may have 250 to 300 chapters by the end of May, given the demand. If we have each one of these chapters, and there's 10 people in each chapter, and each one of those sells 100 memberships, then we've got right there 200,000 members with 200 chapters. So you see how it can grow in that fashion. And of course, we have other things going on as well in terms of support from a number of different entities. But here's the thing that's really important now to understand, is that we would like all the people that become members to consider, or all of you rather, to consider either becoming a member, and if you've got some time, you might want to volunteer with us. If you've got more time, you might want to set up a chapter. And I'm going to leave you with 2 comments. I may think of more, but I'll leave you with 2 to start with. First is that, folks, freedom is not free, and you really are not going to have prosperity without freedom. And we need to have individual freedom. And one of the things I'll say about, I always talk about individual freedoms and rights, because if you look after individual freedoms and rights, you will look after societal freedoms and rights. But we've seen what happens when societal rights trump individual rights. We've just gone through that in the last couple of years. And the last thing I'm going to mention is that you're here because you're interested in perhaps making change for the better. And I used to teach my residents training in cardiac surgery, particularly if there was an issue that had come up and they weren't sure, they were bringing it to my attention. And I would say, look, there are 3 kinds of people in this world: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what the heck happened. So I would like, and I'd say to them, try and figure out what it is, because it's a teaching environment. You figure out what it is, you got 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you know, what studies do you want to do, and what strategy do you want to take forward? And that's making something happen, rather than watching something happen and then the person dies. So that's a bit of a metaphor. But I'm going to end with that, and I'm going to ask you to really seriously consider getting involved with the Alberta Prosperity Project, share the message, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dennis. Just a reminder, we have coffee and donuts on the side there. We probably won't take a break today, and we'll just keep rolling along, but help yourselves to a coffee. And also we will, we pass a bucket a little bit later on, so just so you know. All right. Our next guest is from Calgary. He's been practicing law for more than 30 years. He has effectively advocated for the rights and interests of First Nations in Canada at all levels of government, all levels of court for over 20 years, and has been involved in winning cases for the First Nations at every level of the court in Canada for that long as well. He acted as lead counsel in the Mikisew Cree Nation case at the Supreme Court of Canada, in which the court issued a unanimous 9-0 ruling in favor of Mikisew, in what has become the landmark decision of that court. You might also recognize this gentleman as one of the litigators who has had Dina Hinshaw in the hot seat over the last little while. He is a no-nonsense, let's get results kind of guy, and we're happy to have him on our board of directors as the VP General Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, here to shed some light on independence and the legal system, Mr. Jeff Rath.
Thank you very much. It's always tough following Dr. Modry, but anyway, I'll give it my best shot. One of the things that Dennis didn't mention today that I was hoping that he would, because it's important for all of us to consider this. Does everybody here realize that if Alberta was independent tomorrow, as an independent country, that we would have the highest gross domestic product per capita of any country in the world? That's what, our benighted leaders in Ottawa and Edmonton don't want you focusing on. Like, let's not forget for a minute that as much as Jason Kenney makes noises about wanting to redress issues in and around equalization, that the equalization program itself is supposedly open for renegotiation and readjustment every 5 years. In April of 2019, the program was open again to be readjusted and renegotiated. Justin Trudeau unilaterally, without consultation, without negotiation, without permission, re-extended the program for another 5 years. Jason Kenney did nothing and said nothing. That's how much he cares about our rights and the economic prosperity of your families and of our province. And I personally suspect in this regard that when we have politicians in and around equalization, whether it's at the federal level, being our MPs, or the provincial level, the reason they do nothing about it is because it serves them very well from a political perspective. Provincial politicians all have ambitions to become national politicians. And once they're national politicians, they all know that the best way to buy off Quebec and keep Quebec in line is with our money. Basically, all of the money from the people of Alberta that basically makes Confederation work. Well, the central governments spit on us, look down their noses at us, and tell us they're going to end our provincial economy by 2030. So let's think about that for a minute. 2030. That's 8 years from now. The idiots in Ottawa plan on shutting down the provincial oil economy. They haven't told us how they're going to replace it. Just last week, the Auditor General of Canada came out and said that the biggest problem with all of Canada's 2030 plans is they're based on completely fictitious or imaginary hydrogen energy plans. So in other words, they're planning on ending oil and gas in Canada and replacing it with some sort of hydrogen economy that doesn't exist. The Auditor General's called bullshit, excuse my language, with regard to the so-called 2030 plan on the basis that everything that they're saying they're going to do with regard to basically shutting down the Western Canadian oil and gas economy and replacing it with a non-existent hydrogen economy is completely fallacious because it's based on technology that doesn't exist. So in other words, we have a bunch of people in Ottawa in and around our prime minister thinking that in 2030 they can just wave their magic fairy wands in the air and somehow or other we're going to have an alternate fuel to heat our homes, to fuel our combines, to fuel our trucks, to make our economy work, let alone without any plan. If you think that this is going to happen in 8 years, where does this technology exist? How are they going to roll it out? I mean, they talk about electric cars. Any of us who've lived through a -40 winter know what a joke that is, right? With electric cars, we all know that running any electrical appliance, the thing that takes the most power is the heater. So, ask yourself at -40 how far you're going to get with your electric car, when you've also got to be running a heater in that car to keep yourself from freezing to death. I mean, these are all things that all of the people that live in Ottawa that want to magically make the Alberta economy disappear don't want to talk about and don't want to consider. Several weeks ago, actually, I was driving to an event in central Alberta. Just before I went, I was listening to an idiot in the House of Commons who happened to be a Liberal who was bragging about how he was part of coming up with the so-called Western Canadian Green Plan, right? And one of the things that he was really proud to say in the House of Commons was, get this, there's nothing we can't do with a barrel of canola oil that we can't do with a barrel of oil. So his brilliant plan was to replace oil in Alberta and across the West with canola oil. So just for fun, as I'm driving up the road, being an Albertan, I have to admit to the fact that I do text to drive. So I think my F-350 has autopilot sometimes, but that's a different story. But anyway, I just decided to Google what the spot price was for a barrel of canola oil. On that day, it was $1,012. So the geniuses in Ottawa want to replace oil at at $100 a Putin barrel right now, given the mess of the global geopolitical events, right? With $1,000 a barrel oil, and they think magically that somehow our economy is going to continue to work under those circumstances, right? So this really drove home to me one of the problems that I have, as a fifth generation Albertan who, grew up in this province, watching, what I consider to be, the distinct, culture of this province, which consists of people getting up in the morning, working hard to take care of their families, working hard to take care of their communities, being completely destroyed by being governed by stupid people, right? This is what we're dealing with. It's government of the stupid. So that's one of the reasons, or one of the many reasons, that I am so deeply in support of the Alberta Prosperity Project and the need for Alberta as quickly as possible to organize itself into a manner in which we can declare independence from the rest of the country, simply to preserve ourselves and our families from all of the future stupidity to come. Dr. Modry was speaking about the carbon tax decision at the Supreme Court of Canada. Keep in mind, all the justices, as Dr. Modry says, are appointed by Justin Trudeau. So the carbon tax decision written by Justice Wagner, who recently was quoted in a French newspaper article as referring to all of the Freedom Convoy people in Ottawa as being hostage takers, lawless anarchists who are taking the law into their own hands, et cetera, et cetera. This is Justice Wagner of the Supreme Court, so leaving aside the propriety of a sitting judge making comments of that nature when cases are pending before the court, but leave that aside for the moment. Justice Wagner wrote the carbon tax decision. The first paragraph of that decision starts off, climate change is a global crisis. Because it's a global crisis, it's a national crisis. Because it's a national crisis, it's an emergency. Therefore, the federal government should be able to do anything it wants, basically. Right? Is the way that decision went. Didn't take into account the fact that the case went up as a tax reference. It was never the issue of the science of climate change, or the non-existent science of climate change, as Dr. Modry was speaking to earlier, was never litigated before the court. There was never any consideration as to whether or not any of the so-called global climate events that all the climate hysterics attribute to man-made climate change is either caused by man or could even be ameliorated by the destruction of the Alberta oil and gas economy. I mean, leave all of that aside, right? There's just this finding by the court that because people say it's an international emergency, it's therefore a national emergency, therefore Justin Trudeau can do whatever he wants. And this is why our economy is going to be destroyed within 8 years from now on the whims of people that really don't care one bit about how it is that we can or can't take care of our families in this province. So this is one of the reasons that I'm, as involved as I am in this project. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and again, I'm a fifth generation Albertan. I have no intention of leaving to go live anywhere else. And I'll be damned if I'm going to allow these people to continue to run our province into the ground without standing up and doing something about it. The other thing that the other reason that I'm really excited to be involved in this project is an opportunity to reimagine what a constitution should look like in the province of Alberta and for the province of Alberta. Some of you may know my background is in political science, and I have an honors degree in political science from the University of Alberta, and I have an honors degree in law from the London School of Economics. So these types of issues, and I've practiced for 30 years in the area of administrative law. So basically, I've been suing governments for a living my entire working career. Okay. So one of the things that's become apparent to me over my career is that because we're governed under the Westminster system of government, everybody here thinks we live in a democracy. We think that we have freedoms. We think that, the Constitution is here to protect us. Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that's not the truth. The Constitution is here to protect government, and it's here to, under the guise of quote unquote the crown. The Westminster system of parliamentary privilege and parliamentary law, even dating back to the Magna Carta, was all about protecting the rights and privileges of the nobles and of Parliament over the rights and privileges of the citizens. So keep in mind, under the Canadian system, we have always been the governed. The government always thinks that we will be the governed. And that's something that I think is time, as free Albertans, we should stand up and turn on its head. Yeah. And of course, that's one of the problems that we have in Canada. And we've really seen it in spades in the last 2 years over, what I refer to in court and refer to publicly as a phony public health crisis that we've been stuck in. Now, to be clear, when I say that, I'm not saying that COVID doesn't exist and that COVID isn't a respiratory virus that, people should take seriously. Of course it is. But all of the problems that we've been facing, and it came out in spades when I was cross-examining our benighted Dr. Hinshaw 3 weeks ago, is that all of the measures that have been imposed upon us, and all of the restrictions that have been imposed upon us, are all based on this foolish notion that somehow or other the restriction of liberties and the interference with individual freedoms in society can be used like an accelerator or a brake in a car with that level of control over a respiratory virus that's wildly at loose in society, right? And I can tell you that as being somebody who's been monitoring these things and litigating these things almost in real time on an ongoing basis, what's been going on, and I think a lot of you probably observed it as well from the data, is they wait until the wave is peaked, it's starting to go down, and then they bring in a new wave of restrictions on our liberties. And then oh, look at that. Wow, we brought in these restrictions, and look, COVID's dropping off. Woo, we won, right? Look at us, we're great. Well, from a scientific perspective, it's pure BS. The virus has been doing what it's going to do from start to finish. So all of these measures that they put in, starting with the ridiculous 15 days to stop the spread that didn't work, to the mask mandates they brought in, and I can tell you because I've got the graphs in my office. They brought in the graphs at the beginning. They brought in the mask mandates at the beginning of August of 2020, and COVID just continued to go straight up in the wave we were in. So in the same way that they want to take credit for when they bring in restrictive measures and COVID goes down, why won't they accept the fact that they brought in masks and COVID went up? So gee, maybe the mask caused COVID. I'm not suggesting that's true, but it's just as logical as what they're saying on the other side. Right? I mean, there's no correlation. There may be correlation between some of these things, but as they were happy to say repeatedly throughout their cross-examination, correlation doesn't equal causation. Well, that's the problem. They've been making all of this stuff up as they go along without any proof that anything they're doing is actually making anything better. But here's the thing, right? It's all on the basis that they're trying to quote unquote protect our hospital system, right? So they're taking away your freedom and taking away your liberty because they're afraid that ICU capacity or ICU beds in the province, excuse me, will exceed capacity of the 500 and some odd beds that they have available. Now, keep in mind that ICU capacity now isn't that far off of where it is in a normal flu season when we hit ICU capacity of 400 and change in a bad flu year, right? We're 170 above it, at the peak of COVID, right? But they're using that as an excuse to completely rework the way that our society operates, excuse me, and our basic freedoms in this society. We're told that the unvaccinated can't go to restaurants. We're told that, at a whim, restaurants have to, be shut down for periods of time. Gyms, nightclubs, other facilities are all being closed down. And then, just at whim again, they're telling us at Christmas how many friends we can have and how many friends we can't have and how many friends single people can have versus married people. And all of this foolishness that they're literally just making up as they go along because they don't want to take the necessary steps to protect our healthcare system by protecting the elderly and protecting the most vulnerable, because we all know that anybody that reads the science and understands what's going on, the most vulnerable people to COVID are people over the age of 65 who are already dying of 2, 3, and 4 other things, right? But rather than protecting those people, they want to lock up the healthy people. They want to tell, first time in our history, that we're quarantining people who aren't sick and locking people up in their homes when they're not sick, simply because a government bureaucrat thinks that if we lock people up in their homes, there'll be less people running around getting sick that'll end up in hospital. Well, I guess on that same theory, they can look at, how many traffic accidents there are in a given month and say, oh, gee, we've had too many traffic accidents this month. Next month, we're going to tell everybody to stay home and not drive their cars. Traffic accidents are going to plummet, right? I mean, this is the type of stupidity that we've been subjected to for the last 2 years. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to is working with a team of experts to come up with a new constitution for the province of Alberta, or the country of Alberta, that will prohibit this type of behavior in the future. Individual rights have to take precedence over the rights of government. And that's what we've been dealing with. When we look at the British common law system, and the Westminster parliamentary system, it's all about protecting government and protecting the rights of government. Like in an administrative law context, thank you. In an administrative law context, and this is old British law, but it's really the law of Canada, there's something called the Wednesbury Rule. And the Wednesbury Rule. And it's a rule of administrative law that says that you can only challenge an administrative decision successfully for being unreasonable if the decision is so unreasonable that no reasonable decision maker could come to that same decision, right? So in other words, what this rule means is that in a real sense, the citizen is always wrong and the state is always right. To win on the grounds of reasonableness, I mean, the decisions have to be so far off the wall that a blind person could see it, right? And one of the things that I would propose is that type of logic and that type of protection of government, including the doctrine of cabinet privilege, be completely done away with. From our perspective, there needs to be transparency in government. Now, interestingly, we won a fairly important ruling the other week on the very issue of cabinet privilege. Because, of course, Dr. Hinshaw has been saying that she's not really operating as the dictator of Alberta. And when she passes orders that are called Chief Medical Officer of Health orders, where she actually swears in her affidavit that we're all her patients and she's our doctor, right? So she actually swears that she's everybody's doctor. But, she says, I'm not really the one issuing the prescriptions. Oh, no. I have to first go to the cabinet and say, hey, my patient's really sick. This is how I propose treating him. Is that okay with you? And you uneducated grade 12 graduate, Jason Kenney, would you like to change my prescription and counterride my medical opinion with your own political opinion so that I can then issue it as a doctor's order, right? That's what she says has been going on. And this is how the pandemic has been managed from start to finish. So we haven't been subjected to Chief Medical Officer of Health orders, apparently. We've been subjected to Jason Kenney orders that he's dressed up as Chief Medical Officer of Health orders, right? Where these orders ostensibly allow her, to Dr. Hinshaw, to do whatever, and that's the exact word of the statute, whatever in her opinion, not Jason Kenney's opinion, would abate the pandemic. But as it turns out, she has not been issuing orders in her opinion. She's been issuing orders in Jason Kenney's opinion, much to the detriment of everybody else, everybody in this province. So if anybody was wondering who stupidly said we could only have 2 friends at Christmas, right? Or alternatively, that we're going to shut down the high schools and not let children go to high school, but 18-year-old high school students could still go to strip clubs, bars, casinos, etc. That wasn't Dr. Hinshaw. That was Jason Kenney. right? Operating under the auspices of a chief medical officer of health order. Yeah, that's, I mean, grade 12 graduate. He's now a medical doctor, according to Dr. Hinshaw. So this is what we've been dealing with. And this is what, APP is bound and determined will never happen again under a new constitution of a free Alberta. Now, getting back to the order that was issued last week by Justice Romaine, we're still waiting to see whether the Kenney government's going to appeal it. Dr. Hinshaw was asked several questions, including, did the Kenney government ever override your chief medical officer of health orders and ask you to lock down things harder than Dr. Hinshaw recommended? And whether other groups were more affected by orders from cabinet than were recommended by Dr. Hinshaw. And of course, it's going to be interesting. We don't have her question. We don't have the answers to the questions yet, and we haven't had the ability to continue to cross-examine her yet, which we will. But of course, we're really interested to know the answers to those questions, because if Dr. Hinshaw said no, the cabinet never told her, right, to issue orders against individual groups or businesses that were more stringent than were issued by the chief medical officer of health or that she recommended. If she said no to that, we know she's lying. Because one of the things that happened, and this is going back to the injunction that we were fighting in the Christmas of 2020, when Jason Kenney wanted us all locked up in our homes and not to spend Christmas with our families. One of the things we know for a fact, because we were making fun of them over it, was that when they first came out with the orders, shutting down the high schools and telling people that they couldn't have more than 2 friends and the rest of it, one of the things that they did was they left the restaurants, the bars, the casinos, and the strip clubs alone. And we said, isn't this funny? Kids can't go to school, but they can still go to the strip club and the casino. What's up with that? So the minute we put that into court pleadings and we're making fun of it in the press, well, lo and behold, a new order issues shutting down the strip clubs and the casinos, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if that wasn't political, I don't know what was, right? I mean, there was no evidence that the strip clubs, the casinos, the bars or whatever, were any greater risk at spreading COVID than anything else. I think the statistics even at the time were that 60 or 70% of the spread was coming from the home, where they wanted to lock everybody up so that they could get COVID more easily, but we can leave that aside, right? So, this is the foolishness that we've been dealing with throughout, and it really underlines what happens when we have governments that are not operating under constitutional supervision or under courts that effectively apply the Charter of Rights and Freedoms the way that it was always intended to be provided. And our view is that under a new Alberta Constitution, that needs to be made crystal clear that the individual rights of the individual citizen are to be supreme over those of the central government in every circumstance, full stop. And I don't know how many of you have seen it, but I mean, Premier Peckford of Newfoundland has been writing quite a bit about this. And what he's been talking about is the perversion of Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And in essence, what's going on is that, the government is saying to courts, oh, well, this is reasonably justifiable in a free and democratic society, right? And the courts are simply saying, yeah, that's what we're going to do. As long as the government says it's an emergency or says that we have to deal with it in that way, we're going to take the government's word over the word of the citizen every single time. In effect, go back to what I was saying about the Wednesbury rule, right? What's going on in our courts right now is the courts are applying Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as if it were the Wednesbury rule, which was never intended by the framers of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Infringements of individual citizens' rights were always meant to be the only absolute final resort, and only, according to Premier Peckford, who was there at the time this was brought in times of dire national emergency, where the very existence of the Canadian state was in peril, right? The existence of the state wasn't in peril. We were at risk of overrunning ICU capacity by 10 or 15 beds, which, according to Jason Kenney back in April of 2020, we shouldn't have been a problem, because he claimed that we had the capacity to create 1,080 beds in Alberta, which still would have left us with 800 beds fewer than the state of Alabama, for God's sake, which has the same population as Alberta. So what we have is a government that, because it doesn't believe in the individual rights of the citizens, isn't willing to protect the rights of the citizens, isn't willing to spend our tax money on making sure that our doctors, nurses, and health facilities are adequately funded and resourced to allow them to deal with a public health management crisis that simply could have been solved by putting more money into the issue. We already have more money in the Alberta healthcare system per capita than almost any system in the country. And we have the worst marks for healthcare delivery of almost any province in the country. So instead of taking $2 billion out of the provincial economy by shuttering businesses, bankrupting restaurants, locking people up in their homes, et cetera, why didn't Jason Kenney take that $2 billion and put it into paying nurses more, paying doctors more, incentivizing private physicians who work outside of the AHS system, say, hey, we know you have a private family practice. We'll pay you double under the AHS tariff if you can go into the hospitals and relieve some of the poor doctors who are being overworked in the hospitals. Instead of fighting with the nurses unions about paying them less, pay them more, support them more, and incentivize nurses that are not working in the AHS system in hospitals to go back to work in that system. Right? Well, all of that, don't even get me started, because I was representing a bunch of doctors who were literally being told they were going to be fired in the middle of what they were still calling a healthcare crisis for not wanting to disclose their private medical information with regard to whether they're vaccinated or not. And they're being told unless they disclose their private medical information, they're going to be fired from the AHS system at a time when we allegedly have a system that's in crisis. And now, of course, for those of you that have read the work of Eric Payne, he was one of our clients, he'd written a letter to the College of Physicians and Surgeons back in September of 2021, simply asking a bunch of questions about how effective the vaccines were, whether, how harmful the vaccines could be to children, all those types of things, and whether or not as a society and whether we shouldn't as a medical system have all of those questions answered before we are mandating these vaccines on people and before we are, attempting to encourage parents into having their children vaccinated with a vaccine product that Pfizer's own documents prove is more likely to harm these children than COVID, right? Those are all legitimate questions, right? The College of Physicians and Surgeons, of course, didn't answer Dr. Payne's letter, didn't respond to any of his questions, but instead are now persecuting him by going after him through disciplinary process for creating quote unquote misinformation by simply asking questions that the College of Physicians and Surgeons refuses to answer, right? This is the society that we live in. And this is not, for me, this is not a society that I want to continue to live in or that I want to continue to tolerate. And again, it's for all of these reasons that I believe that what we need to do is to completely restructure the relationship between us that the government says are governed and those people that we elect that are supposed to be responsive to us and who are supposed to be our employees, not vice versa. And I think that's really, for me, again, one of the reasons that I'm so strongly support the APP project is it's time that we flip the system on its head and make it clear that the people that we elect to manage the government on our behalf actually respond to us in a manner that makes sense. I mean, we've all seen, the foolishness that we've been dealing with the United Conservative Party, where it's pretty clear that that most Albertans no longer want to be led by Jason Kenney, given the degree to which he's trampled on people's rights throughout the pandemic and all of the patently stupid decisions that have been made by him over the course of this public health management crisis that we've been involved in. So a number of us have been involved in trying to, through the democratic process of the UCP, or the United Corruption Party, as I now call it, to show up in Red Deer to vote Jason Kenney out of office on the 9th of April. Well, we all saw what happened there, right? We had a corrupt board of directors of the United Corruption Party change the rules halfway through at Jason Kenney's request. We're now having a mail-in ballot that none of us have any faith in terms of having a fair result come out of it. And at the end of the day, we're going to continue, I'm confident, to be governed by Jason Kenney, who's shown one thing, and that's, one thing only, that's he's very good at staying in power, regardless of whether any of us want him to remain in power or not. And again, this is what I am suggesting through an Alberta Constitution that we can change. I like the idea of having a fixed recall mechanism built into the Constitution of our province, where, on 200,000 signatures, there has to be whoever is the leader of the province, the premier, is recalled, and there has to be a fresh election. And I mean, this is where we need to be. We should have had that mechanism available to us back in 2020 when all this stupidity started, so that we could be governed in a manner that made sense, as opposed to the manner in which we've been governed. So, these are all things that I would urge you all to think about. As was mentioned previously, there's been a petition that's been created to do one thing and one thing only. You're not signing a petition in support of becoming an independent country. You're signing a petition that supports the right of your fellow citizens and yourselves to have a vote, be given the choice as to whether or not we want to remain part of Canada, or whether or not we want to engage in a process to have Alberta recognized as an independent country. And I guess that's, for me, one of the things that's been taken away from us over the last 2 years is the ability to choose. Even on the whole vaccine mess, whatever happened to my body, my choice, right? I mean, I support the rights of my fellow Albertans and friends and family to be vaccinated if they think that's the right choice for them. But I also support the right of the 20% of Canadians across the country who aren't convinced that these vaccines are either safe or effective. And as time goes on, we're seeing more and more that the 20% who've applied their critical thought process to this, as opposed to being bullied and coerced by governments into getting vaccinated, are probably on the right side of the science on this now. I mean, Pfizer this week, I don't know if anybody else saw it, but went in front of the Security and Exchange Commission to advise them with regard to the future of Pfizer's stock price, that they are unlikely to get permanent approval for the Pfizer vaccine because of its limited effectiveness, right? The country of Denmark, right, just canceled all vaccinations in Denmark because they don't see the vaccines as being effective. All of this is being ignored, and there's literally 1 in 5 of us, in Canada, that now can't get on an airplane, can't take a holiday, can't leave the country by plane with their family, because Skippy has decided that if we're filthy unvaccinated people, we shouldn't be allowed on an airplane, right? And the problem with that is that it flies in the face of the Charter of Rights. Premier Peckford is actually taking a case forward in that regard. It won't hit the courts until September. But in the meantime, the evidence is overwhelming that the vaccines don't stop the spread and may only be effective for as little as 1 to 3 months. So this is what we're dealing with. Yet we still have a prime minister who says, I don't give a crap about the charter. As far as I'm concerned, people need to do what they're told because I govern you. You're not the boss of me. I'm the boss of you. And 1 in 5 of you are not allowed on a plane because I say so, right? This isn't the country that I grew up in, right? So, I'd like all of you to keep that in mind. I would like all of you, to please consider signing the petition to the Alberta legislature requesting that a referendum be held on the issue of Alberta independence. I think the time is now, and quite frankly, what Dennis is saying about the waterfall, or the waterfall that we're approaching, couldn't be clearer. And I guess I'll finish on this one point. And I don't know whether any of you have heard of Bill 201, Senate Bill S201 or Senate Bill S233, right? These two bills are going to fundamentally change the nature of our country and fundamentally change the nature of our economy, right? S233 is the bill that's going to bring in a universal basic income. So you got to hear this, because it's one of the wildest things that I've ever read in my life. So the universal basic income is going to start at the age of 17. So you don't have to be in school. You don't have to have a plan to continue in school. You don't have to have a plan to engage in any form of trades training or skills training, or have a plan for your life whatsoever. Well, or be a member of the workforce or whatever it is, right? You can literally be living in your mom and dad's basement, and you can continue to live there and be given $24,000 a year to drop out of high school, sit around at home, and do whatever you want, and not have to make anything out of yourself or out of your life. Now, S201, this is the real clever part. It's going up through the Senate with S233. S201 is going to lower the vote in Canada to 16 years of age, right? So, and I don't want to tell you how shallow I was as a teenager, but that being said, if somebody told my 16-year-old self that all I had to do to be able to drop out of high school at the age of 17 and be given $2,000 a month with which to buy beer and muscle car parts, right? I'll tell you how I would have voted, right? I mean, it's a fundamental attack on the foundation of what we understand our country and our culture to be. That we all work hard to improve the lives of our family. We expect our kids to do the same. But under this new plan that the Liberal government has for us, this is the way of the future. Then my next question is from a purely economic perspective, and I studied economics when I was in university, and one of the first lessons we learned was that the liberalized unemployment insurance program that the Liberals had in the early 70s, where you only had to work for 12 weeks, then you could go on UI for however many weeks you wanted, and then and so on, right? All that did was raise the real unemployment rate in Canada by 3%. Well, what do you think this so-called UBI program is going to do, right? And then on top of it, if we're going to take everybody at the age of 17 and teach them on a going forward basis that they don't have to learn how to become contributing members of society, as this plan rolls forward, who's going to pay for it? Because our labor force is going to be continually shrinking at the lower end, where we need people to start coming in to just ask Skippy, he'll pay for it. So, but you can see where I'm going with this. In no time whatsoever, we're going to go from having one of the most effective workforces in the world, one of the highest levels of productivity in the world, to having an economy in a country that looks a hell of a lot like Greece. Only we don't have the beaches and the warm weather, that would afford us the ability to live outside of our homes and laze about on the beach all day. But that's the plan that Trudeau has for us on a going forward basis. And I see it as a matter of urgency, taking, the universal basic income plan that they have for us, the zero carbon 2030 plan that they have for the Alberta economy. I see these things as imminent, and the only way that we can avoid this is as a matter of urgency, take Alberta out of Canada and stand on our own 2 feet as a free and independent country. So thank you very much for listening to me today. It's a real honor and a privilege. I kind of consider this area my old stomping grounds. I had a friend that had a cabin at Perryvale when I was a kid, and we used to always come up here hunting coyotes and deer and moose and spending quite a lot of time up here. So it was nice to drive back up here again and get reacquainted with some of my old haunts from my university days. So, and it's a pleasure to see you all, and thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it. What's that?
I'm going to stay up here for the Q&A. We're going to have some questions now, as soon as I get these guys each a microphone. There you go. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jeff. That was really good. Okay. All right. So the first question says, Do we have to keep royalty as part of a new Alberta? It seems to be a celebration of a dictatorial group.
No, we certainly don't have to continue to deign fealty to the Queen, or to the monarchy. There may be advantages, though, in terms of remaining as a member of the Commonwealth. There are 54 Commonwealth countries, and 34 of them are constitutional republics that have no relationship whatsoever with the monarchy, and so that's what we would be advocating for at this particular time. There may be advantages to remaining within the Commonwealth, but like I said, with respect to trade and justification for what we're doing, we have our own military, which would align with Commonwealth military, particularly the Canadian military. So there may be some advantages. Now, if it came to the point, however, where the other Commonwealth countries had fully adopted, for example, the UN Agenda 2030, the UN World Economic Forum Agenda 2030, and they're all implementing the Great Reset, I would think that we would perhaps not be so inclined to join the Commonwealth. But for the time being, if you just think about it from the perspective of Alberta becoming an independent nation, and you're worried about, you wear Canadiana on your heart, for the time being, we are advocating to remain within the Commonwealth at this particular time, but not be associated at all with the monarchy.
This says, Jeff, what are the plans to bring the Indigenous population to an independent Alberta?
One of the things that I've been really proud of in terms of my involvement with the Alberta Prosperity Project is that I spent quite a bit of time with former Chief Lawrence Corderay of Miksuk Cree First Nation, coming up with a program to fully engage First Nations in the creation of a new Alberta Constitution and the governance of Alberta. So Lawrence and I went from, sort of one end to the other in terms of all of the things that have been impediments to First Nations in this province becoming fully actualized participants in the economy of Alberta, and have come up with a plan, and it's contained on the APP website and within the program of the APP as to what our plan is going forward. Lawrence and I are confident that the plan that we've developed will fully engage the support of the Indigenous communities in the province, and we're very proud to be associated with it.
Just to add to that, Lawrence Corderell, who is a former First Nations chief, as Jeff was saying, is also on our board, and his position is the VP of Indigenous Sovereignty.
Why can't Alberta veto anything?
Well, no, but it goes back to what Dennis was talking about in his talk. I mean, structurally within the Constitution of Canada, the deck is stacked against Alberta. That being said, and this is what's been driving me nuts personally as an Albertan for the last 15 years or more. Because I grew up when Peter Lougheed was prime minister, or premier of Alberta. I mean, no premier of Alberta, like Lougheed, certainly never suffered popularity by picking a fight with Ottawa. So what really has me scratching my head is why so many successive governments of Alberta in the last 15 years have been, willing to roll over and have their tummy tickled by whoever it is that, that's governing in Ottawa. I mean, we're when I elect a premier of Alberta, I'm hoping that person is going to be a strong advocate for the province and stand up for our rights. Instead, they go there with their little blankie, sucking their thumbs and asking if Daddy could please help us by giving us some of our goddamn money back. And I'm sick of it. To be clear, when Dennis says $60 billion leaves this province every year and only $27 billion comes back, that's why when you read the petition that we've drafted, our position is that Alberta is leaving Canada debt-free, is leaving Canada debt-free. Unlike every other province in this country, Alberta has been a net contributor to Confederation to the tune of some $700 billion. So thank you. We'll take our proportionate share of the Canadian military and the equipment. We'll take our proportionate share of, well, first of all, we'll be retaking all federal properties and all federal lands within the province of Alberta, et cetera. Because
and parks.
And obviously including the parkland, because it belongs to the province of Alberta. We've paid for it all 10 times over. So, this is what we need to keep in mind. I mean, in terms of any province having the ability to declare themselves independent from Canada, Alberta's in the strongest position because we have no debt to negotiate with the rest of the country. If anything, the rest of the country still owes us.
Yeah, I agree. I got to add something. I think this is kind of important to understand is in terms of the difference between business providing a product or a service and the government creating a business to provide that product or service. Here's the way it looks. Private industry providing a product or service can do it at $1. For government to provide that same product or service, it costs $3. Think about that inefficiency and think about that in the context of our healthcare system as well. But I got to digress. I know you got more questions, but I love to chat. So I want to tell you a story about Ralph Klein. So and Ralph was a dear friend. He was a friend of millions of people, and he was really well loved. But so I've been thinking about the dysfunctional relationship between Ottawa and Alberta for a long time, ever since the NAP. And I said to Ralph at the annual general meeting in Red Deer in 2003, just privately, I said, Ralph, I think I've got a solution to fix the dysfunctional relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. Would you like to hear about it? He says, you do? And I says, yeah. And he says, absolutely. I said, well, it's based on this question. I said, Ralph, if you were the president or the prime minister of the sovereign country of Alberta and Canada came to you and said, we would like Alberta to join Confederation under the current terms and cost of membership, would you? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, I love this answer. He said, to ask the question is to know the answer. Of course not. And I said, well, then the corollary is, do you not think that you have a moral and an economic responsibility to Albertans to fix Alberta's circumstances within Confederation? He says, yeah, I guess I do. And he said, well, I've started drafting a document that I think will show you how to get there. So over the next few months, I drafted a document that I ran through constitutional lawyers, business people, engineers, other professionals, as well as many politicians, including Don Mazankowski, who was a personal friend of mine. And I titled the document, Alberta at the Crossroads, Status Quo, Refederation, Autonomy. And what does that mean now? So Ralph and I then met for 2 hours. I took him through the document in his office. And then he asked me if I'd like to present it to caucus. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And I started working on a PowerPoint presentation with my secretary. And then I got a call from the chief of staff. The chief of staff said, you're not going to present. And I said, well, why not? He says, your document is about independence. And I said, no, it's not about independence. It's about leverage. And so that document is as prescient now as it was then, because status quo, we're heading for the falls, the way we're looking at it now. Refederation was fixing Alberta's circumstances within Confederation that I think I've explained to you is impossible. And number 3, autonomy meant independence untethered to Canada. But the document that was drafted spoke about the leverage of a successful referendum on independence. This was in 2003. Why did they not want to go ahead with it? First of all, the chief of staff was a former federal MP. It was Peter Elzinga, who I also consider to be a friend of mine, but still he wouldn't let me speak. But as well, at that particular time, Alberta was booming. So it was, why upset the apple cart? Everything is going so well. Why upset the apple cart? And when Ralph resigned in 2006, of course, we had a AAA bond rating, the number 2 GDP per capita region in the world, no debt, and the lowest unemployment in history. And that is so easily achievable again. But they didn't think at that time that the good times were ever going to stop. They didn't think about the great reset that was coming. But here we are. And so, in any case, I thought I'd just have to tell you that story. Sorry about that. I have another story. No.
The next question says, what about the national debt? Will Alberta be responsible for a portion of that?
I think I just answered that. From my perspective, the answer is no. I mean, we've been net contributors to Confederation since 1965, and we're, as far as I'm concerned, we're ahead by $700 billion. And if anything, Canada owes us, not vice versa. And certainly, when you look at the way Trudeau's been spending over the last 2 years, it's time to go, because that equation is changing rapidly. And by the time he's done this term of office, our national debt is going to be somewhere north of $3 or $4 trillion, which is just completely shocking. Just a quick question for everybody: where do you think we'd be in terms of our healthcare system and their ability to lock us up in our homes if, instead of putting $600 billion into CERB, they just took $300 billion and split it up even 10 ways? Like, you forget population. Give Newfoundland $30 billion for all I care, right? Every province, well, I'm sorry, it should be 11 ways now because we have none of it in the territories, but whatever. Give everybody $30 billion out of that $600 billion and tell them to put it all into expanding their ICU capacity, doubling doctor salaries, doubling nurses' salaries, treating people in healthcare with respect. And so that we don't have to lock people up in their homes, because people in healthcare are being well paid, motivated to work, not under stress, and our hospitals are being funded to the tune of probably 5 or 10 times what they need. That was an option, but no, instead, let's have some goofy welfare program where we're paying able-bodied people who are not at risk in any serious sense from COVID, either getting seriously sick or dying, paying them to stay home when they're perfectly capable of working, vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's one of the greatest, as far as I'm concerned, public health mismanagement fiascos of, in global history. $600 billion. Think about what even putting half of that into our hospitals would have done.
What about old age security and the Canada Pension Plan?
Well, as I said earlier, we overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year, and similarly, OAS is overfunded as well. The reality is that as an independent nation, there's a few things that can be said. One is the pension plans can be significantly enhanced. Number two, even though you're now in a new country, the new country of Alberta, it wouldn't matter if you were living in the new country of Alberta or France or Colombia, you would still get your Canadian pension. The difference is that we would be able to enhance it substantively. And in addition to that, there was a study out of the Fraser Institute that indicated that for people that are contributing to their pensions now, because they're still in the working group, that there would be the probability, that you could reduce your contributions by 50% and still get the same pension. But if you think about that, for everybody, current pensioners and people that are in the workforce right now, you all benefit significantly. So that would be the outcome, again, of living in the new country of Alberta. And one thing I'd like to say as well is that there are going to be all kinds of concerns that people are going to raise and questions that are posed. And many of them are going to come from those who absolutely don't want Alberta to have control over its destiny. And that's, you've heard the term, it's fear-mongering. But there are responses, there are credible answers to each one of those particular concerns. So don't be fearful. Think about it. Go to the website, because the website you will see, for example, the policy governance section, and in the bylaws, you'll see how accountability, responsibility is built into what we are proposing. But there's also a section called frequently asked questions. And there's some 34 frequently asked questions on the website right now, but there's going to be many more that we will be putting up. We've answered them already, we just haven't got them up on the website yet.
And sometimes on Monday morning or Monday afternoon, they get another 82 questions from the weekend to answer. And I don't go through them first. At what point would the Canadian dollar drop? At the election of independence, at the referendum for independence, or at the time of Confederation?
my recollection is that the Canadian dollar, if you look at what was going on in Quebec in terms of real estate values and everything else, it was everything was tending to drop in advance of the referendum. Let's face it. I mean, if Alberta separates from Canada, the Canadian dollar is going to be worth about 50 cents, right? In terms of its current, in terms of where we're at currently. So, I mean, everybody, should keep in mind that that on this project going forward, there are probably better places to have your money than in Canadian dollars.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And here's what I'd like you to think about. And we're not financial advisors, but Jeff is exactly right, is that there will be a reduction in the value of the Canadian currency. And the reason for that is because Alberta contributes so much value to the Canadian currency. And so without Alberta's contribution, that the Canadian currency is going to plummet. So the safest thing to do is that once there is in 2023, an independent-minded government that is elected, consider where you might want to put your money. You could put it in gold or other precious metals. That's one thing. We're talking about cash assets that you have. In addition, you can consider a stronger currency, such as the US dollar or some other currency. That would be the safest thing, because I absolutely think I have an even more pessimistic perspective on what the Canadian dollar will do. Jeff said 50 cents. I think it could get to 30 or 40 cents.
What is Alberta going to be called?
Alberta.
Right. Yeah, I like it. If Alberta became a sovereign nation, how would we keep the rest? How would we keep the rest of the world out?
I don't know, as a province, that we've ever been that concerned about keeping people out. So, I mean, I honestly think that we'll be looking at a period of economic growth and expansion, going forward, and we're going to need additional people coming into the province to fill all the new jobs that are going to be created. I mean, think about what the Alberta economy will do without idiots in Ottawa who are former environmental activists, shutting down the oil industry and doing everything they can to destroy the Alberta economy. Imagine an economy that has all of the regulations of Ottawa taken away, replaced with sensible regulations made here at home, with a 10% tax rate, flat tax across the board. I mean, we could be looking at an area of prosperity, or an era of prosperity, completely unseen by this province, previously. And that's that's exactly why we're all working as hard as we can, is for a prosperous future.
Yeah, and to add to that, for those of you who've been around for a while, in the late 70s, Alberta was becoming the economic center of power in Canada. There was massive immigration of people and businesses from not just elsewhere in Canada, but from around the world. And why not? Because Alberta was literally liquid gold for everybody. All 5 major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did, CIBC. But that collided, of course, with what was occurring in Quebec with the Quebec secessionist movement. And so here's a little bit of understanding about the national energy policy. The national energy policy ostensibly was implemented to transfer wealth from Alberta to other poor regions in Canada so that they would have similar social programs. But the real truth of it was 2 things. One was to prevent Alberta from becoming the center of economic power in Canada. And now you understand a little bit more about why Justin Trudeau wants to shutter Alberta. It's not just climate, it's to prevent Alberta from rising. But the second reason of the national energy policy was to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada, because the Quebec secessionist movement was at the same time, to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth. Now, fast forward to now, as Jeff said, there would be massive investment. Many of us are immigrants, 2nd, 3rd generation immigrants to this province. Alberta is twice the size of California. We have 4.4 million people. California has 40 million people. Texas has 30 million people. It's 300 square miles smaller than Alberta. Amazing how I know these facts, eh? Anyhow, the point that I'm getting at is that we're going to need people to move here for those jobs that have skills, have knowledge, because businesses are going to need that. And guess who also benefits? The unions benefit, because there are union jobs that'll be created as well as private jobs. Everybody benefits. Nobody's left behind in a booming Alberta.
So just a couple more questions here. I'm getting a sign from the back of the room. It says, are you coming to Beaumont ever? Please do. Okay. Well, we'll try. Our next event's actually tomorrow. We're in Westlock at 1:30. Doors will open at 12:30. Next Friday, the 6th of May, we are in Coronation. The 7th of May, we are in Camrose. The 13th, we are in Drayton Valley. 14th in Grand Prairie, and 15th back in Whitecourt. So we are going to be up in this neck of the woods, not necessarily near Beaumont. But if you build it, we will come. How about that? Where in Westlock specifically? Westlock Memorial Hall. Thank you. All right. How many signatures are we aiming for?
Well, at minimum, I'd like 500,000. And, that, as far as I'm concerned, that gives us an imperative that the legislature can't ignore. So, in terms of chapters being organized and people getting involved in volunteering, the more people that we can have volunteering to work with the petitions and to get signatures on the petitions and then forward them to my law office so that they can be collated and safely stored until we provide them to the legislature, the better. That's certainly, if people are looking for ways to help, that's probably the biggest one.
I just have to digress for a second. Jeff is so busy, he doesn't get a chance to speak at many of our events. And I was thrilled today to hear your comments, Jeff, and I'd like you to all give him a real round of applause for coming here. Jeff, you really add a lot to this movement when you have the time to speak to an audience, and it's wonderful that you're here today.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And again, I really feel honored and humbled to be here, and I really appreciate all of you listening to what we have to say today. So thank you.
So Jeff mentioned chapters, and Dennis also mentioned chapters. So probably you're sitting out there, well, you're wondering, what is a chapter? And so at the beginning, like Dennis said, we thought we were going to get like 60, 70, however many chapters. So since February 18th, we have 139 already organized chapters. And the chapter program, the education program, grew so quickly that we had to divide Alberta into bite-sized pieces. So we have 7 regions now with regional directors, and actually we're still looking for one regional director in the Bonnyville area. But 2 of those directors are here today. Jason Lemieux has been back at the merchandise table. He's actually got 2 regions, Region 3 and Region 5, and Pam Koenig is Region 6. So all of the chapters, all the small communities is what we're aiming for. If you want to do something in your community that is, if you're motivated to spread the word about the Alberta Prosperity Project, we'll give you the things that you need to be successful. Why? Because when you're successful, we're successful. And Jeff is right. We need all the help we can get to get 500,000 signatures. And if we have a chapter in every single community in this province, getting those signatures will be a breeze. That said, we have 43 more people who want to be chapter leaders already, and we had 140 people on a volunteer forum that we had on Thursday night. And so from that, the emails are coming, the messages are coming, and the phone calls are coming. We're going to do this. This is possible. You have to believe.
The question was, what region are we in?
This is region number 1. Is it? Is that right, Reg? Yeah. So
Anarchy.
if you're interested in being, in being a chapter or doing something in your community, you can talk to Regine Lavoie. He's at the back on the camera, or you can come and talk to me. I'm the educational coordinator, but I do a lot of other things. My favorite thing is talking. It's one of my favorite things. Come talk to me afterwards and I'll tell you what to do. What you can, if you need that information, you can send an email to contact@albertaprosperity.com. Talk to any of the volunteers that are here today and they will direct you. It's really not hard. We will make sure you're successful.
And you don't even need to remember that. Just go to the website, albertaprosperity.com, and you will be able to be channeled. If you just go where it says volunteer, the tab volunteer, just check, and it'll take you right to, where you can communicate with us and express your interest in becoming a volunteer or chapter leader.
Our goal is that we want to have a community group or a chapter in every single community. So if you want to start one, come and talk to me. But there's not a list per se. But I mean, if you send an email, if you're interested in knowing specifically, is there one here or there or anywhere, just send an email. I mean, we can probably list it there. Attendance with what? Oh, for sure. Yep. Yeah, for sure. So the question was, if there's a chapter in a certain area, can I bring a group of people to it? Absolutely. But I mean, I'll talk to you after the show if that's okay. Then we'll move on.
That's a really good question because, the website that has been created is being upgraded on Monday. But you give us another good suggestion, and we're all open for good suggestions. And I think we should create a list of all of the chapters. So in other words, we got the 6 regions and the chapters in each region. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, it is great. And we'll do it.
Okay. So you're going to start your own chapter. I know you are. I like that. How or what is the goal of the APP to approach British Columbia to support the West, or Alberta to sufficiently import resources?
Okay, I'll try and answer the question. First of all, I will just say that in British Columbia, there are individuals that want to start a BC Prosperity Project. Second, Saskatchewan has already started a Saskatchewan Prosperity Project implementing our intellectual property. Now, this question also refers to the transport of import-export through BC. Well, of course, the port in Richmond is or in Vancouver is one of the largest on the West Coast, and there's a massive amount of goods that come into that port that have to cross Alberta's borders. And on the issue of transporting those goods and services, because Alberta would be an independent nation, we can certainly facilitate the transport east and west across our borders, provided that the rest of Canada doesn't embargo us with respect to our desires to transport our goods and services to the West Coast, particularly our oil and gas to the West Coast. So Alberta will have absolute control of what goes across our borders east and west, but there's no reason that we wouldn't want to work collegially, collaboratively with the rest of Canada, because it helps us. It's just that it's important to understand right now that we're considered to be landlocked, but we're really not. We're policy locked. We'll have far more control of the transport of our natural resources and any products that we produce in this province as an independent nation at this particular time. And of course, you probably know the UN, or you've heard the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Articles 124 and 125, give landlocked countries the right to access tidewater for the transport of their goods and services, and that includes our hydrocarbon industry, minerals as well. So, and if we were embargoed, if we were dealing with an intransigent British Columbia or the rest of Canada, well, we could provide massive tariffs on product that crosses our borders from east and west. That's number one. We could stop it altogether, including flyovers. So you can see how much clout we would really have. Plus the fact, I have a feeling, how many people here think that in the November US elections that the Republicans will take control of the House and the Senate again? Yeah, I think it's pretty likely. The point that I'm getting at here is that we would have, I believe we're going to have tremendous US support for Alberta independence as well.
So I have one more question, but it is not really for you guys. So you can leave if you want, or you can stay. Okay. We need to engage our youth. How are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to, after these gentlemen leave the stage, I'm going to introduce our next guest. But what we have started is youth leaders as well. So not only chapter leaders, but leaders in universities and leaders in colleges and things like that. So
the only thing that I would say, and I think I said this earlier as well, is that a lot of young people, of course, have been indoctrinated already, but they also get indoctrinated through Instagram and TikTok. And where do you think we're going with respect to our international marketing and advertising company to access young people's minds as well? We don't want to indoctrinate them. We just want to educate them.
So thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Dennis. I know I didn't ask all of the questions, but they will get put on the website eventually. All right. Our next guest, as I said, we are engaging youth. We're trying to get more and more youth involved. And so by having youth speakers is one of the ways that we can do that. Our next guest has joined us as a youth leader at the Alberta Prosperity Project, and we are excited to have her on board. She was born and raised right here in Athabasca, and in my brief conversation with her the other day, I would suggest that she is wise beyond her years. She believes, as do I, that her personal experiences, past and present, have borne in her a strength for overcoming challenges. She is highly motivated to help others to do the same. Her goal is to grow every single day, and that is a great goal. She has had to step outside the boundaries of comfortability and push those boundaries in order to promote personal growth. And in doing that, she has discovered that her potential is endless and that her strength is endless. She just had to figure out how to harness it and put it all to work. She has enrolled in the addictions counseling program at Northern Lakes College for the fall term, and she has set her sights on making the world around her a better place. Ladies and gentlemen, with some personal perspective on the desire for a brighter future, Miranda Wager.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just want to give a quick disclosure. This is my first speech. A little bit nervous, so just bear with me. Thank you, Shannon, for the introduction. She did a wonderful job. As she said, my name is Miranda. I'm 22 years old. And for those of you that don't know me, I was born and raised here in Athabasca. I am pursuing a career in addiction counseling, as I have a great passion for helping others, and I want to help as many individuals as I can by encouraging them in their recovery to battle their demons and come out the other side with the ability to live their lives instead of simply surviving. I believe there is far more to life than avoiding death. At some point over the last 2 years, I had lost hope in any kind of successful future at all. I remember crying alone in my home in isolation many times as more restrictions continued to surface, riddled with anxiety and innate fear that there was no end in sight. As time went on, I seen and felt in my gut that something was not right. Things were just not adding up to me, and I watched the very world as I knew it crumble and fall to pieces. With the government overreach, forced isolation, forced work leave, loss of personal medical choice, division of people, hatred, blatant lies, canceled family gatherings, gyms meant for health and wellness being closed, and travel restrictions, I watched my friends, family, community, and fellow citizens struggle. And that's putting it lightly. These things were happening at lightning-like speed, at the snap of a finger, which up until this point, I had never even fathomed possible. Early in the pandemic, I lost a relative of mine that was like a brother to me by overdose at the age of 21 years. At this point, treatment centers had reduced capacity due to the life-threatening virus in the name of saving lives from COVID, this at a time when demand for their services was at an all-time high. That prevented people like him from getting the help they desperately sought and desperately needed. This, ironically, ultimately played a part in his death. Just this year, I lost an additional 5 friends in the span of 1 month to overdose. Between the ages of 25 and 40 years old. Alberta recorded its deadliest year on record for drug overdoses in 2021, with 1,758 deaths, a 33% increase in drug poisoning deaths compared to 2020. 1,758 people with families, children, friends, gone. We've doubled our pre-pandemic overdose mortality rates. I also know of many personally that have lost family members and friends to suicide, and many lives have also been lost due to postponed and canceled medical procedures in this same time frame. On February 3rd of this year, the National Post printed a summary of a study released by Johns Hopkins University that clearly states lockdowns imposed during the last 2 years have had little to no public health effects, but rather were ill-founded and imposed enormous economic and social costs in those places where lockdowns were adopted and implemented. They reported they have contributed to reducing economic activity, rising unemployment, reduced education, caused political unrest, contributed to domestic violence, and undermined democracy. This information is not being covered, talked about, nor shared by our mainstream media or governments. It was a well-written article that brought validity to remembering how I felt. I felt alone. I felt like I was crazy. Did any of you ever feel alone or like you were going crazy? They intended, I believe they intended for us to feel that way. The more alone we feel, the quieter we become. The more fearful we become, the more complacent we become, the weaker we become. We become less likely to stand up and more likely to allow the trampling of our rights, freedom, mental, and physical health to continue. As a young individual, I have many dreams and aspirations for the future. I would like to be in a loving relationship with a life partner, get married, have children, travel the world. I would like to have a career that I am proud of and can excel at. I would like to be a part of a prosperous community and have the time and the extra money to volunteer and help those in need. Right now, it's seeming more and more impossible to simply make ends meet and keep a roof over my head, let alone prosper. And as such, I have to set aside many of these goals for now and make this my top priority. I know if I don't do something significant and play a role in this change we so desperately need, I won't have the freedom in the future to make these goals and dreams a reality. I won't have a future at all. Our government system is broken, and the federal government system will never allow Albertans to prosper. This was happening long before COVID. I remember turning 18 almost 5 years ago and not having a huge desire to go out and vote because I knew at the end of the day, my voice wouldn't make a difference anyways. Due to our voting structure and our lack of representatives for the West versus the East in Canada, The West has no voice in what happens in our own province, nor where our wealth goes, never mind to say in what happens with the rest of Canada. It's really quite a sad day when you're first becoming an adult and you already have the preconceived idea that your voice doesn't matter and that the government and politicians will do whatever they wish to do, regardless of your efforts or your vote, one way or another. My mom, Michelle, was the first person to tell me about the Alberta Prosperity Project and introduce me to the wealth of information these fine people have gathered to share with us. And from that point forward, my attitude and thought patterns changed. I got excited about my future again. I finally see a light at the end of the tunnel, and not only a light, but a future full of freedom, prosperity, one in which we can walk hand in hand, leaving no Albertan behind. I know many of you are here for your children, for your grandchildren, fighting for our generation to have a future. For that, I thank you, and I thank you on behalf of the rest of my generation and those below mine as well. As parents and grandparents, you play an extremely influential role in our lives. You are the reason we are who we are today. My mom, Nan and Pa, aunts and uncles, and role models of all kinds have shaped me into the individual that I am today. I'm going to encourage as many of my friends to start coming to these events as possible, to get them involved and to be a part of this solution. And I'm asking you to please do the same. Bring them to these events, show them the information, help educate them on how they can help. Get them excited, get them involved. You are our wisdom, and you are who we look up to. To my generation in the audience right now, we are the future. We need to get involved and we need to educate ourselves so that nothing like this ever happens again. We all know that actions have consequences, and subsequently inaction brings consequence as well. I will no longer stick my head in the sand and hope that things will sort themselves out. I am guilty of hoping other people will fight my battles. I'm guilty of being lazy at times and just wanting to shut the world out and shut the stress off. Yet my problems don't just magically disappear. I cannot go out to my garden and shout, "There's no weeds, there's no weeds, there's no weeds," and expect them not to grow. The weeds will grow and they will take over my garden. I must remove the weed and remain consistent with the maintenance of continuously removing the weeds in order to keep the beauty of my flowers. Such it is with freedom. It's earned through hard work and consistency, just as a physically fit person with a healthy diet and exercise, a successful business person putting thousands of hours into their work. I know how easy it is to get caught up in the worldly clamors and our day-to-day lives and obligations, but we cannot afford to do this any longer. No more. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an economist or a lawyer. I don't have all the answers. As a matter of fact, the older I get and the more I learn, the more I realize just how little I know. What I do know is this is a viable solution. I know I can set up chairs at events and use my voice to share the message with others. I do know that we have massive strength in numbers, as we've seen so beautifully demonstrated in our convoy. Replace those feelings of emptiness, loneliness, despair, and defeat in your heart with passion, strength, determination, love, and kindness in your soul. I don't just believe that we can do this. I know we can. We all have a responsibility to stand up and play our part, whether it's volunteering at an event or just spreading the message to as many people as we can think of, being kind to our neighbors, showing them there's a way out of this mess. So what are you going to do today to be a part of the solution? Whatever answers I don't have, someone else does. And if they don't, we'll find them. The future's so bright, I gotta wear shades. And on a side note, I seen this post on social media the other day, and I'm going to leave it with you as a final thought. When Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, and Justin Trudeau can own nothing, and they can sit down, look me in the eye, and tell me that they're happy, then maybe, just maybe, I'll believe them. Thank you guys so much for coming, and for to the APP for allowing me to speak today. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next great leader, Miranda Wager. Okay, on that note, I'm going to leave you with your homework. Miranda touched on it as well. This movement that we've created here, this is a people's movement. We can't save you. We're asking you to help us, and you have to save yourselves. So we have one chance. We have one chance to secure a future for our children and our grandchildren. We have one chance to gain our freedom and our prosperity, and that is by electing an independent-minded government in 2023. I'm going to try to tell you a story. I did it yesterday, and it was okay. I don't know whether I can do it today. In Medicine Hat, my granddaughter came with, and there's a little girl here too today. My granddaughter's 8, one of them is. And at the break, there was a lot of people, and they were asking questions about the chapters and about this and about that. So she snuck in there and she pulled on my shirt and she whispered something in my ear, and then she ran back to her seat. So then the show went on. And then at the end, when we were driving home, she said, "Grandma, were those people all trying to be members of the Alberta Prosperity Project?" And I said, "Some of them were." And she said, "I hope all of them join, because that's how we're going to win." And she's right. So we need you guys. We need everybody. We need you to buy the memberships. We need you first and foremost to sign that petition. We need you to become chapter leaders, and you're going to start 2 chapters. We need you to become volunteers. We need you to create events in your communities that will bring people together so we can talk about how we can all move forward and gain our independence and our prosperity and our freedoms. Start a prosperity garden. Invite your neighbors over to enjoy that produce, enjoy the bounty. We need to show our friends and our neighbors that there is hope. We need you to be the change that you want to see in the world. We have a vision for a community of Alberta, and we are building a community within ourselves. And we're asking all of you to join us. The community is growing. It's growing so fast, like faster than I ever thought. Our solution, with no politicians at our table, is to unite 500,000 to 1 million to 1.5 million Albertans together. That's something that's never been done before. We are creating history right now. I'm inviting you to all be on the right side of that history. My challenge to you, and I encourage you to join us. A true community is not about being geographically close to someone or part of the same social network. It's about feeling connected and responsible for what happens. Alberta is our ultimate community, and everybody in this room has a crucial role. Therefore, we must become bigger. We must be bigger than we've ever been before, more courageous than we've ever been, greater in spirit, and larger in outlook. We must restore our communities, owing our ultimate allegiance not to the government, but to each other. Alberta will become a sovereign constitutional republic, one where the First Nations people sit at the table as partners in the creation of a new Alberta. I'm going to leave you with a quote with Samuel Adams. "It doesn't take a majority to prevail, rather an irate, tireless minority that is keen on setting bushfires of freedom in the minds of men." I'm going to ask you to go out and set those bushfires. Thanks for coming out today.